I came across this story a few months ago. A file buried deep in an old archive from the highway department, one of those maintenance logs that shouldn't be interesting. But someone had written a note in the margins. Just 2 words, still open. The entry mentioned a small roadside motel out in the Mojave, closed since 1989 after a series of disappearances. Yet someone had updated the ledger recently. I don't know why I followed it up. Maybe because I've driven past places like that, half sunk in sand, still wired to power, neon signs flickering against no one's eyes. This story isn't about ghosts. It's about what happens when a place remembers you, long after you've forgotten yourself. This is The Room Still Open. I don't know if I ever told you about the place where I used to stop for gas on my way to the coast. It wasn't even a real town anymore. Just 3 buildings crouched against the desert like they were ashamed to still exist. The road curved, the radio went to static, and there it was every time. A rusted sign half lit by a buzzing tube swaying gently in the wind. Sunset Rest Motel. The name didn't fit. There was no sunset there, not really. The sky went from white to black without ceremony, and the sun always looked like it was dying of thirst. I stayed there once. That's all it took. It was 2 years ago, late summer, the kind of heat that makes the world hum. My car was overheating, and the next real town was 40 miles away. The place looked empty, but the office door was propped open with a cracked coffee mug, so I went in. Behind the counter sat a man in his 50s. Or maybe 60s, it was hard to tell. His skin had that sandpaper look people get when they've been outside too long. He didn't look surprised to see me, but he didn't look glad either. "You're in luck," he said, reaching for a key that was already hanging from the board. "Only one left." I didn't believe him. There were 12 rooms, all doors shut, no cars in the lot, but I was too tired to care. "Room 6, he said, setting the key on the counter. The tag was wooden, hand-carved, numbers burned in with what looked like a soldering iron. "You'll want to keep the door closed tonight. Wind gets mean around here." He smiled when he said it, but it wasn't the kind of smile that belongs to the words. The room was cleaner than I expected. Bare, but not filthy. A single bed, faded floral curtains, an old rotary phone that probably hadn't worked since Reagan. There was even a Bible in the drawer, though it looked like someone had torn a page out of the middle. I dropped my bag, turned on the fan, and sat down on the edge of the bed. That's when I noticed the smell, something faint, metallic. Like dust and heat had mixed with something that used to be alive. It wasn't strong enough to bother me, but it never really went away. Around 9, I walked back to the office. The man, his name tag just said Earl, was watching a small TV behind the counter. The screen was gray static, the kind that buzzes like trapped flies, but he didn't seem to notice. "Need anything?" he asked without looking at me. "Just checking if there's food nearby." He paused, eyes still on the static. "There used to be a diner. Burned down in Euro 3, folks still come through sometimes. Some stay, most don't." He blinked, slow. "You're passing through, right?" I nodded. "Good." He smiled again, the same off-kilter expression. Best not to get comfortable. That night I couldn't sleep. The air was thick and dry, like it didn't know how to move. I lay there listening to the hum of the fan and the faint rattle of the window. Then somewhere down the row of rooms a door opened. It was a gentle sound. The squeak of hinges, the soft slap of wood closing again. I waited. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured, crossing the gravel toward my room. I sat up. My heartbeat felt too loud for how quiet everything else was. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. Nothing, no knock. No shadow under the gap. Just stillness. I was seconds away from calling out when I heard the voice. Soft, male, almost conversational. "You didn't lock it." The words came from the other side of the door, calm as if someone were reminding me of a forgotten chore. My mouth went dry. I hadn't told Earl I was in room 6. I got up slow and checked the handle. The door was locked, deadbolt and all, but when I looked closer I noticed something carved into the wood. Faint near the bottom of the frame. Not initials. Not words. Just 3 lines scratched into the grain. Deep. Old. I went back to bed, pretending I hadn't seen them. In the morning, I asked Earl if someone else had checked in during the night. "No," he said, pouring himself coffee that looked like oil. "Haven't had another guest all week." I told him what I heard. The voice. The steps, he didn't seem surprised. Just looked out the window toward room 6. Then he said something I didn't expect. "That's the one you got, huh?" "Yeah." He nodded. "That room doesn't lock, right?" "It did last night." He stirred his coffee. "Sure it did." I left that morning with the uneasy feeling that I hadn't really left. Every time I closed my eyes after that trip, I'd hear the words again. Low, calm, patient. You didn't lock it. And the strange thing is, I don't remember ever turning the key. I didn't go back for almost a year. But last winter, when a job took me along the same stretch of road, I found myself slowing near that same half-dead sign. Sunset Rest Motel. The rest was gone now, just 3 flickering letters left fighting against the wind. Part of me wanted to drive past. But curiosity has a way of pretending to be logic. I told myself it was just to see if the place was still standing. Just to look. By the time I realized I'd pulled in, the dust had already settled around my tires. The office door was open again, the same mug still holding it in place. Inside, everything looked exactly as it had before, only more faded, like someone had drained a layer of color from the world. And Earl was still there. He looked up as I stepped in, blinking like he'd just woken up. "Well," he said after a moment, "you found your way back." I tried to smile. "Didn't expect you to still be here." "Not much reason to leave," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Town's gone. Gas station's gone. But the motel's still here." His voice was softer than I remembered, a little hollow, like someone who'd been talking to walls for too long. I hesitated. "Is room 6 still open?" He didn't answer right away, just stared through me like he was listening for something else. Then, "It's always open." He turned, took the key from the same hook as before and set it down. The tag was even more worn now, edges blackened from fingers or fire. "You sure you want that one?" he asked. I nodded before I could think of a reason not to. The room hadn't changed either. Same curtains, same bedspread, same faint hum from the ceiling fan that sounded just off rhythm enough to feel alive. But there was one thing that hadn't been there before. A smell, sharper now. Not rot exactly, but the kind of metallic sting that comes after something wet dries. The Bible was still in the drawer. I flipped it open out of habit. The torn page was still missing. But now, written on the inside cover in neat block letters, was a single line. He never checked out. The ink had faded to brown. I should have left then. But the sun was already falling behind the scrub hills, and the thought of driving that stretch of desert in the dark felt worse. Around 10, I called the front desk. The phone rang 4 times before Earl answered. "Yeah? Just wondering." I hesitated, feeling stupid. "That note in the Bible? What's it about?" There was a pause long enough that I thought the line had died. Then, "Probably a joke," he said. "People write things." His tone didn't match the words. Before I could say anything else, the line went dead. I tried to sleep. It must have been close to 2 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of footsteps again. Not heavy, barefoot, slow, deliberate. Gravel shifting outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for them to stop like last time. They didn't. The handle turned. It moved just a fraction before catching on the lock, and then, softly, so close I could almost feel the voice through the wood. "Let me in." I'm cold. It was the same voice as before, calm, familiar, but this time, there was something else, something underneath. Like 2 voices speaking in sync, one just slightly delayed. I whispered without meaning to. "Who are you?" A pause. Then, almost kindly, "You already know." I waited, frozen until the footsteps finally retreated, but the handle stayed crooked. In the morning, I opened the door. The gravel outside was smooth, undisturbed. No footprints. When I turned back to the door frame, I noticed something I hadn't before. On the inside, near the bottom, the same 3 carved lines, but deeper now. Fresh. That's when I realized they weren't just scratches. They were tally marks, 3 last year, 4 now. Earl was outside sweeping dust that would be back in 5 minutes. He looked up when he saw me, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept in days or years. "Everything all right in there?" "There was someone at my door last night." He nodded, slow. "Yeah, he does that sometimes." "Who?" Earl leaned on the broom handle, gaze distant. "A man checked in years ago. Left his truck, his clothes, even his wallet. Just walked out into the hills one night. Never came back." "Police?" "They looked," he said. "Didn't find him. Said coyotes probably did." He tapped the handle against the porch rail, but every so often folks in room 6 say they hear someone walking outside, asking to come in. His eyes flicked up at me. Most don't stay long enough to answer. I drove off that afternoon. The road shimmered in the heat, the sign fading smaller in my mirror. But as I passed the last curve, I caught a flicker in the corner of my eye, one of the room curtains shifting, like someone was standing just behind it, and I swear for half a second, I saw myself there, face pale behind the glass, watching me leave. A few weeks after that second visit, I started dreaming about room 6. It wasn't the kind of dream you wake up from and laugh about. It was the kind that leaves residue, like dust in the lungs. In the dream, I'd hear a sound faint and steady. 3 knocks, silence, 3 more. I'd look at the clock and it always said 3:12 a.m. Every time I'd wake up before opening the door. I told myself it was just memory, my brain replaying what I'd been afraid of. But then one night I woke up at exactly 3:12, no reason, no noise, just the sense that something was standing outside my apartment door, waiting. That's when I decided to go back. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't stop thinking about it. When I arrived at the motel again, a thin layer of dust coated the check-in desk. The TV behind it was still playing static. Earl wasn't there, I called out. No answer. The board behind the counter still had only one key missing. Room 6. I picked it up, telling myself I'd leave it on his desk and go. But the moment the key touched my hand, I felt that same pulse of dry electric air, like the world was holding its breath, and then the phone behind the counter rang. It shouldn't have worked. The line had been dead before, but it rang 3 times, clear as anything. I lifted the receiver. Nothing. Just a soft clicking, like someone tapping a fingernail against glass. Then, under the static, check in. It was barely a whisper, almost lost in the hum, but it was there. Room 6 looked exactly the same. Dust on the floor, a single fly trapped against the window. The bedspread hadn't moved since the last time I saw it. I sat on the edge of the bed, the key still in my hand. The air felt heavier at night. Not colder, just aware. At 3:10, I found myself watching the door without realizing I'd been staring at it for an hour. At 3:12, 3 knocks, precise, gentle. I froze. The same pattern repeated, 3 knocks. Pause, 3 more, then silence. I checked the clock again. 4:12 seconds later, the phone rang. The same rotary phone that hadn't had a dial tone in decades. I let it ring 6 times before picking up. Hello? This time the voice was clearer. Male. Calm. It's cold out here. My hand tightened on the receiver. Who is this? A pause, then softer. You didn't lock it. I turned toward the door. The bolt was in place, but the handle was slowly moving, just a fraction of an inch back and forth. I whispered into the phone. What do you want? Room 6. The voice wasn't angry. It sounded tired, as if it had been asking the same question for years and no one ever understood the answer. Then, quietly, you said you'd let me in. I dropped the receiver. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. When I looked up, the door was still closed. But now, carved just above the handle, were 3 more tally marks. Morning came too bright, too silent. I walked to the office. Earl was sitting behind the counter again, as if nothing had happened. You left the key out, he said. I thought you weren't here last night. He shrugged. I'm always here. I told him about the knocking. The phone. The voice, he sighed, rubbing his eyes. You shouldn't have answered. What happens if you do? He looked at me, and for a moment I thought he might actually tell me. But all he said was, that's how it learns your name. That night I stayed again, why I couldn't explain. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I just needed the pattern to break. 12 came. 3 knocks, silence, 3 more. This time I didn't move, but after the second set I heard breathing, right against the door. Slow, patient, like someone on the other side was matching mine. And then a single whisper, closer than before, almost against my ear. We're not outside. The sound came from behind me. I turned. The window curtains were moving as if someone had just brushed past them. At dawn I left for good. At least I thought I did. 2 nights later, back in my apartment, my phone rang. The call came from an unknown number. Area code, same as the town where the motel stood, I answered. Silence. Then, through faint static, room 6, and after a pause, you didn't lock it. I haven't gone back. But sometimes around 3:12 a.m., I hear 3 soft knocks against my wall. I've moved twice since then. The sound always finds the right door. The motel phone system was ancient. Rotary units with frayed cords and yellowed plastic labels that still read front desk and operator. I'd always assumed none of them worked. Most of the lines hadn't been connected in years. But after that night, the phone started ringing again. At first, it was just once or twice a week. A call would come through to the front desk. I'd pick up and all I'd hear was static. Faint, hollow static. The kind that feels like someone breathing on the other end. Then the line would cut out. Earl didn't react when I told him. He just stared at the wall, nodded once and said, "That's the line from room 6. But that room's been empty," I said. He blinked. Slow and deliberate. Not always. The next evening I came back early before sunset. The desert light turned everything a dusty gold. The wind pushed sand against the glass doors like soft rain. From the lobby I could see down the long hallway where room 6 waited at the end. Its door was shut, same as always. I don't know why I picked up the phone at the front desk again. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself it was dead. Maybe I wanted to hear something I could explain. I lifted the receiver. Static, then faintly a voice beneath it. Check in. The same tone, the same calm rhythm as before. Male but wrong somehow, like the sound came from a place that didn't have air to vibrate through. "Who is this?" I asked. Nothing, then, softly, "You're late." I slammed the receiver down. That night I didn't stay in room 6. I took one farther from the hallway, near the vending machine where the hum of electricity could drown out my thoughts. But around 3 a.m., the sound came again, ringing, this time from the phone in my room. The line wasn't supposed to work. It rang twice, then stopped. I told myself not to touch it, not to look. It rang again 3 times, then silence. When I finally picked it up, I could hear the faint sound of someone talking, but not to me. 2 voices, a man and a woman. He checked in again. He doesn't know yet. He will. Their tone was casual, like they were discussing the weather. Then between their words, I heard a third sound. Breathing, wet and close, right against the receiver. I dropped the phone. It didn't stop. The voices kept going even after it hit the floor, curling through the static like whispers underwater. I unplugged the phone from the wall. The ringing stopped immediately. When I told Earl the next morning, he didn't look surprised. He was cleaning the counter with a dry rag that only moved the dust around. "You shouldn't answer when they call," he said. "They?" He hesitated, then nodded toward the hallway. "Not everyone checks out?" I stared at him. "You mean ghosts?" He smiled a tired, humorless smile. "Call them what you want. Doesn't change the bill." By the 3rd night, the calls came even when I wasn't near a phone. My cell would buzz, screen blank. When I answered, all I'd hear was faint static, and in it, distant motel sounds. The ring of a front desk bell. A door creaking. Once, I even heard my own voice saying, "Check in." That's when I realized the voice on the motel phone had been mine all along, recorded somehow, repeating the same phrase back at me like an echo that didn't belong to the world I was in. I tried leaving for good. Packed my things, got in the car, started down the cracked 2-lane road. But halfway out of town, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I ignored it. It buzzed again, then again. Finally, I answered out of sheer anger. "Stop calling me." The voice on the other end was a woman's this time. Soft, kind, almost apologetic. "Sir, this is the front desk. You left your key." "I don't care," I said. "Keep it." A pause. Then gently, "But you're still checked in." The call cut. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the motel lights flicker once far behind me, and then, impossibly, the glow of a red neon vacancy sign flashed just ahead. Same shape, same lettering, like the motel had moved in front of me. I stopped driving after that. Now when I sleep, I hear phones ringing somewhere just out of reach. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm home until I notice the clock, 12, and the faint click of a rotary phone starting to spin. By the time the 5th night came, I stopped pretending I was only there to document the story. I wasn't an observer anymore. The motel had folded me into whatever routine it kept replaying. The static didn't just come from the phones now. It hummed through the walls. Behind the wallpaper, behind the flickering vacancy sign, behind my own thoughts. Every sound seemed doubled, layered. When I closed a drawer, I'd hear it close again half a second later, softer, like a memory catching up. At 2:58 a.m., I sat at the desk, listening to the cheap clock tick. I told myself I wouldn't pick up the phone if it rang again, that I wouldn't answer, but the fear didn't come from waiting for it to ring. The fear came from the thought that I might pick it up before it did, and that's exactly what happened. At 3:11, without any ringing, I lifted the receiver. There was already someone on the line. "You always answer too early," the voice said. Male, calm, distant, like before. But it was clearer now, closer. "Who are you?" I asked, a pause. Then quietly, "You already know." The line went silent, but I didn't hang up. Something in me wanted to listen to the static, to find a pattern in it. And buried in the hiss, I heard something else. A faint recording of my own voice. It was saying the same words I had just spoken, but seconds earlier. As if the call had looped back through time, I put the phone down, heart pounding. It rang immediately. The motel looked different in the daylight, smaller somehow, like the horizon had crept closer overnight. The desert air hung still, heavy as if even the wind didn't want to pass through. Earl was sitting outside by the vending machine, staring at nothing. I asked him again about the phone lines. He just said, "They're old." Then after a long pause, "Sometimes they remember." "What do you mean?" He didn't answer, just tapped the side of his head and went back to staring into the dust. That night I recorded myself. Just a simple voice note on my phone, asking questions: who was calling, what did they want, what happened in room 6. I left the recorder on the nightstand and tried to sleep. At some point, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, the recorder was still running, but the timestamp showed 8 hours of audio, even though I'd only been asleep for maybe 3. When I played it back, the first few minutes were normal, my voice, the sound of sheets, the hum of the motel's old AC. Then, around the 4-hour mark, I heard something else, breathing, close. Then the faint click of a rotary phone spinning, then my voice. "You shouldn't have stayed," except I never said that. The voice was me, but distant, like a version of myself from somewhere else in the building. The longer I listened, the more I realized something terrifying. The voice wasn't just speaking, it was answering me. Every question I had asked hours earlier was being echoed back, twisted, delayed. "Who's calling?" "You are." "Why me?" "Because you stayed." "What's in room 6? "You." It wasn't possession the way I'd thought. No demons, no ancient rituals. It was something quieter, smaller, more intimate. The motel was using memory like a wire, pulling pieces of me through its static, threading them back in the wrong order until I wasn't sure which version of me was real. The next morning I tried checking out again. Earl wasn't at the desk. The logbook lay open. I flipped through the pages. Every entry was written in the same handwriting, mine. Each line had the same name. My name, each with a different date. The earliest one was from years ago. I went back to my room. The mirror by the bed caught my eye. For a long time I avoided looking at it. There was something wrong with the reflection. It always seemed a split second behind. Now, though, I forced myself to stare, and I saw it clearly. The reflection moved first. It picked up the phone before I did. I watched it lift the receiver, bring it to its ear. Then the phone in my hand began to ring. I didn't remember touching it, but there it was, vibrating gently, cold plastic against my palm. When I finally raised it, I heard a faint voice breathing on the other end. "You shouldn't have looked." The mirror fogged slightly, even though the air was dry. In the reflection, my mouth wasn't moving, but the voice on the line said very softly, very kindly, "See? You're learning to answer on time." That's when I realized what Earl meant. The motel didn't haunt people. It replaced them piece by piece until the copy was the only one left, answering every call, checking in again and again, forever. And the static wasn't just noise. It was all the people who had ever picked up the phone too soon, all trapped between echoes waiting for someone new to answer. I stopped sleeping after that. Not by choice, just because I couldn't tell anymore if I was awake or not. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd dream I was back behind the desk, answering a ringing phone that never stopped. Then I'd wake up sitting at the desk, the receiver still in my hand, static whispering into my ear. The motel wasn't trying to take my body. It didn't need to. It was crawling into my thoughts, rearranging them, like a static signal hijacking a weak frequency. When I tried to remember the road that led here, I couldn't. I remembered driving, yes, but every turn led back to the same horizon. Every landmark blurred into another gas station, another flickering sign. Every mile of the desert had the same shape as the motel's hallway. That's when it hit me. The motel didn't exist somewhere. It existed inside the memory of everyone who ever stayed here. And now, it was inside mine. The first clear sign was my handwriting. It started changing. I found a note on my bedside table one morning that said, "Check in," written in thick black pen. I hadn't written it, or maybe I had. The handwriting looked like mine, but tighter, more deliberate, as if someone was tracing my letters instead of writing them. Another note came the next night. "Remember where you are." But when I tried to, I couldn't. Every memory I pulled up, college, my apartment, my friends, had this grainy static over it, like an old videotape recorded over too many times. Faces blurred, voices looped. I tried calling someone, anyone, but my phone didn't have service. When I checked the call history, every entry said the same number, 6 at 3:12 a.m. The phone rang again. This time I let it ring 5 times, 6. Then I picked up. "You're almost done," the voice said. It was mine again, but older, slower, like a tired version of myself. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Leave a message." The line clicked and a faint beep followed. Without thinking, I started talking. I don't even know what I said. Maybe I was apologizing. Maybe I was confessing. Maybe I was just begging to remember who I was before this place. When I stopped, the beep returned. Then I heard my own voice replaying the same words I had just spoken. Only this time, I could hear something else layered beneath it. A low hum. A heartbeat. I realized what the motel was doing. It was recording me, every sound, every word, every thought, and stitching them into its static, so that eventually even I wouldn't know which version of me was real. I found Earl in the morning, sitting in room 6. The door was wide open. He looked pale, almost transparent in the sunlight. "How long have you been here?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Long enough to forget what I checked in for." "Why don't you leave?" He tilted his head. "Leave where?" "There's nowhere to go if you can't remember how you got here." For the first time, I noticed something on the nightstand beside him. A tape recorder, old and dusty. Marked Room 6 Archive. I pressed play. The tape hissed for a while. Then my voice, not from last night, from weeks ago. "Guest name? Earl. Duration of stay?" "Until I forget." My own voice, interviewing him. Except that wasn't possible. I'd never recorded anyone. Or maybe I had before forgetting it. That evening, I sat by the window and watched the motel lights flicker across the desert. Every so often, one bulb would die out and another would flare to life. And I'd wonder how long it had been happening, how many times this cycle had played before me. At 3:12, the phone rang again. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the mirror by the bed. The reflection looked calm, almost peaceful. Then it smiled before I did. "You're the last one who remembers," it said in my voice. I stepped closer. "Remembers what?" The reflection blinked, and for a split second its eyes weren't mine, they were Earl's. "That this place doesn't need your body. It just needs your story." The mirror fogged again. The surface shimmered like water. I could hear faint voices beneath the glass, dozens of them. All familiar. All mine. "Check in. Check in. Check in." Each one a recording, layered endlessly. That's when I realized the motel didn't haunt people. It preserved them. Every guest became a memory, replayed until it wore thin. It didn't want to destroy you. It wanted to archive you, and once it finished, the living version of you was no longer necessary. I smashed the mirror. It didn't break into shards. It cracked like a frozen lake, slow and deep, and from behind it came a faint glow, like light bleeding through water. I could see shapes in there. People, standing still. One of them looked like me. Holding a phone receiver, I turned away. Outside, the neon vacancy sign flickered once. For the first time, it read "no vacancy." For a moment, I thought that meant I was free. Then I realized it only meant there was no room left because I had finally checked in. By the time the sun rose, I wasn't sure which version of me was still moving. The man who had driven into town weeks ago, The one who'd made recordings of himself? Or the one who now existed only inside the motel's hum, playing back faintly through every vent and wire? The motel looked quieter than ever. The desert light had turned everything bone white, like the world had been bleached of color. Dust hung in the air, heavy and unmoving. I made myself pack. Not because I believed I could really leave, but because that's what sane people do when they realize they're losing their grip. They act normal. I folded my clothes, zipped the bag, unplugged the phone from the wall. Even then, I could still hear it ringing. It wasn't sound anymore. It was a memory replaying itself in my head. At the front desk, the logbook lay open again. Same as before, the last few pages were still filled with my handwriting, but now every line blurred together, the ink spreading like veins across the paper. I looked at the last entry. Name, unreadable. Checkout, empty. For a second, I thought I saw it move, the pen stroke slowly completing itself. That's when I felt it. Something standing right behind me. I turned. Earl. Or at least, what was left of him. His eyes looked sunken, like glass marbles left too long in water. His shirt was clean, pressed, the same as the day I'd met him. But he had no shadow. You can't check out, he said softly. I have to, I told him. I can't remember who I was before this. He tilted his head. That's what it wants. The forgetting. It's not punishment. It's replacement. What happens when it's done replacing me? He smiled faintly. Then it stops calling. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sand scraped against the windows like whispers in a different language. My car sat in the parking lot exactly where I'd left it, but something about it felt wrong. Like it was a memory of a car, not the real thing. Still, I got in. The key turned, the engine caught, the dashboard lights flickered, the road stretched out before me, pale and endless. For the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. Then I glanced in the rearview mirror. The motel was gone. Only the horizon remained, flat and empty. For a few miles, I believed it. That maybe I'd escaped. Then the static started again, not from the radio, from inside my head, a low hiss like air leaking from a sealed room. Then a voice, faint but familiar. Check in. I gripped the wheel harder. No, I left. You left last time too. Who is this? Who do you think? I glanced at the passenger seat. My phone lay there, screen black, though I could see a faint reflection of movement on it, as if the display was showing me from an angle the room didn't have. Then the GPS spoke. For the first time since I'd turned it off. Arriving at destination. Room 6, I slammed the brakes. The dust around the car rose like smoke. When it cleared, I was back in the parking lot. The same cracked asphalt, the same vending machine by the office, the same flickering sign. Vacancy. I ran inside. The front desk was empty. The clock on the wall was frozen at 3:12. On the counter lay a key. Room 6, it was warm to the touch. When I looked at the logbook again, a new entry had appeared. Name, Earl check-in. Today checked in by my name. The ink was still wet. I tried to tear the page out, but it wouldn't rip. The paper just stretched, thin and translucent like skin. That's when I realized the truth. The motel didn't just record voices or memories. It recorded roles. When one version of you stopped remembering, the next picked up where the last left off. I wasn't the guest anymore. I was the clerk, and Earl, whatever he'd become, had finally checked out. The phone behind the counter rang. I stared at it for a long time. If I didn't answer, it would keep ringing forever. If I did, the loop would close. But there's something about the sound of a ringing phone. It feels like an obligation. Like someone somewhere is waiting for you to remember them. I picked up the receiver. Static, then softly, front desk. It was my voice. But this time, I didn't hang up. I listened. Room 6, please. The voice on the other end was trembling. Young, unsure. Name? I asked before I could stop myself. Earl. Welcome back, I said. And as I spoke, something inside me relaxed. The world steadied. The ringing stopped. I hung up, smoothed the logbook page, and waited for the next guest to arrive. Outside, the neon sign flickered once more. No vacancy. The truth becomes almost believable. Once you say it enough times, no one checks out, not really. They just forget that they ever tried. By the last morning, the desert had stopped moving. Even the wind seemed to have accepted the silence. Dust hung in the air like a curtain that never fell, and every step I took left no print behind. The highway shimmered, endless and useless, as though it had never led anywhere at all. The motel sat behind me, quiet as a photograph. I had packed my bag, if you can call it that, folded what little I owned into a shape of leaving. But I couldn't remember when I last checked in, or who gave me the key. The number on it read 6, worn to the point where it could have been a 9. I stood there for a long time, key in hand, watching the door from the parking lot. The morning light hit it at an angle that made it look slightly open, not wide enough to walk through, just enough to breathe. I should have left then, get in the car, drive until the sand turned to something green. But the thought of driving felt absurd. Who would I be driving away as? Because when I looked at the reflection in the motel window, it wasn't exactly mine anymore. The face was close, familiar even, but the eyes didn't blink when I did. The more I stared, the more my memory kept trying to fill in the blanks with borrowed images. Someone checking in before me, signing the same name in a shaky hand. Someone who looked relieved, saying, "I just need one night." That phrase echoed inside me like it belonged there. Maybe it always had. Inside room 6, the air felt thicker. My breath didn't fog the mirror this time. The curtains were drawn halfway, caught in that same frozen draft that never seemed to move. The smell, old metal, heat, and that faint sweetness of something that's long since decayed was still there. On the bed lay a half-open guest ledger. The pages looked brittle, as though one wrong word could shatter them. I flipped to the last written entry. The name was mine. The date was tomorrow. Below it, in the faintest pencil line, "Still open." That was when I finally understood what the motel really was. It wasn't feeding on people. It was keeping them. Not their bodies. That's too easy. It took something quieter, something that stayed behind long after you left. The details. The moments. The small things that made a life belong to someone. Every guest who checked in left pieces behind, like echoes filling empty rooms until the motel had enough voices to sustain itself. And when the voices ran out, it called new ones back. Maybe that's why I could never remember the last town I passed. Maybe there wasn't one. The phone rang once, though I didn't remember plugging it in. The line hummed faintly. "Front desk," I said, almost automatically. A pause. Then a voice that sounded like mine, but from far away. Recorded almost. Someone left their key in room 6. My hand opened without me realizing. The key dropped onto the bed. I could still hear the voice repeating the line, softer each time until the static drowned it out. When it stopped, I heard something new. Breathing. Not from the phone, but from the walls. Slow, heavy, perfectly timed with mine. It wasn't malicious, it was intimate, like the room was matching me. Heartbeat for heartbeat, inhale for inhale. I closed my eyes and whispered, "What do you want?" And the answer came not as a word, but as a feeling. To remember. That was it. That was the entire truth. It didn't want to haunt or hurt, it wanted to stay alive. And the only way to do that was to hold on to anyone who ever stayed long enough to leave an impression. And now it had me. When night fell, I sat by the window and watched the empty highway. A single neon letter buzzed outside, flickering between vacant and vant. Each time it flickered, I thought I could see someone walking past the edge of the sign. Always out of focus. Always heading toward the office. Maybe that's how it starts for someone else. The same faint silhouette. The same whisper of invitation. Maybe another traveler will stop here tomorrow, tired and lost, thinking they've found shelter for the night. They'll sign their name, take a key, and hear the same faint hum behind the walls. They won't know that I'm the one behind the desk now, that I'm the voice on the phone, that I'm the reason room 6 still looks freshly cleaned, because someone has to keep the lights on, someone has to remember the guests, and the motel remembers everything. If you ever find yourself driving through a desert that doesn't seem to end, and you see a faded sign for a place called the Wayfarer's Rest, don't stop, even if you're tired, even if it's the only light for miles. Because there's no checkout time here. There never was, and the room is still open. The motel's been gone for years now, torn down, The land bought by some development company. They built a gas station where the office used to be. But every few months, someone writes online about hearing a phone ring out there, faint under the hum of the lights. Maybe it's nothing. Wires in the ground. Or maybe the place just found a new way to stay connected. I tried to find the guest ledger again. It's gone from the records, but sometimes when I'm recording at night, I hear a small click in my headphones. Like someone just picked up the line, "This is Soul from the Abyss," and some stories never check out.